morning. It's Thursday, the 27th of October. I'm Michael Rowland.
And I'm Virginia Trioli. The top story on ABC News Breakfast today: Eurozone leaders are in crucial talks aimed at solving the region's crippling debt crisis. Leaders have reached an in-principle deal to beef up the region's rescue fund and to recapitalise Europe's banks.
Germany wants lenders to accept a 60% write-down on Greek bonds. Bankers, however, are offering 40%. Earlier on ABC News Breakfast, Westpac senior economist James Shug said Germany will have to step up to help those debt-ridden nations.
There is probably a non-negligible probability that at some point it could break down. I'm surprised I'm even saying that. I never believed that would be possible. But, you know, it probably requires Angela Merkel to sacrifice her political career, to alienate her party, and to make some really tough decisions that would give her a wonderful legacy, but would really upset a lot of Germans, I can tell you. You need that sort of leadership to really achieve a successful solution. There needs to be fiscal transfers between Germany, the richer countries in Europe, and the poorer countries. That's anathema to Germans. It's anathema to German politicians too. But that's what you need to see happen if the euro is going to survive.
James Shug speaking to us from London just a short time ago. For more on this, Oliver Hartwich joins us now. He's a CIS Economics Research Fellow and he joins us from Sydney. Oliver, good to talk to you again. First of all, can I just get your response to James's analysis there about just how politically difficult this will be for Angela Merkel if the right thing is to be done now by Europe, if the Eurozone is to be saved, that's how hard it's going to be. That's the tough choice that she faces. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree. It is extremely difficult politically for her. It's also difficult for her legally, constitutionally, because Germany just had a ruling of the Constitutional Court and they put clear limits on the extent that Germany can commit itself to aid for Greece and for other periphery countries in the Eurozone.
Can that not be wound back? Is that just now in stone?
Well, Angela Merkel has talked about it before, and she thinks that if Germany really wanted to commit itself further, they would even have to talk about constitutional reform, maybe getting an altogether new constitution, because it means enormous transfers of power from Parliament in Berlin to Brussels. And I think the Germans and the German public are at the moment not ready for it. Also,
that's huge, it's time-consuming, and Europe needs to act quickly on this situation.
That's true. If we just remember how long it took the Europeans to get together to negotiate the Lisbon Treaty, the current treaty, that was 10 years and it took several referenda in a number of European countries. And what they're needing now is probably more substantial than this Lisbon Treaty. And they simply don't have the time for that anymore.
All right, look, before we get to some of the details that might be emerging, what have you been made aware of this morning that strikes you as particularly useful or significant arising from the meeting so far?
Well, what they have agreed so far was to recapitalise European banks. They want to increase the so-called Tier 1 core capital of European banks from 7% to 9%. Doesn't sound much, but it will actually cost Europe more than 100 billion euros. And that's the first announcement. And banks will have until June next year to come up with that extra capital. At the moment, it's quite unclear where this capital is going to come from. It could come from the European Rescue Fund, and that's something that the Germans, again, wanted to prevent originally.
All right, and also we're hearing word that Greece will be allowed to make its repayments much more slowly. In fact, some banks are going to be persuaded, aren't they, to take a bit of a haircut when it comes to the repayment of debt owing to them.
Well, that's the big discussion point at the moment. Germany has already indicated that they want to see a haircut of 60% on Greek debt. The banks are offering 40%. Somewhere in the middle they will have to find an agreement. But it's going to be very hard, and the banks are really playing it very hard as well. They are threatening to activate some credit default swaps if the Greek haircut will go beyond the 50% mark. And that's basically threatening financial Armageddon.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's not only provocative, but it's suicide if they insist on that, isn't it?
Yes, the banks are actually threatening the whole system again with a too big to fail argument. They say that they are a system relevant institution and that therefore politicians can't afford to punish them too hard. And unfortunately, something's got to give eventually, because they will have to solve that problem. And by the way, it is not just a debt problem, it is a competitiveness problem. They can take away Greece's debt, and yet after 5 or 10 years, if nothing else changes in Greece, they will be exactly at the same point that they are today.
So that's what the banks are warning of. If they can settle and agree somewhere around about 50%, in your view, Oliver, will that make a difference?
Well, it would probably make a little bit of a difference for Greece. The problem is it could still spread to other countries. And then we're talking about Italy. And Italy currently stands at close to 2 trillion euros in debt. And that's the real worry for European politicians, because we have seen that at the moment we don't have any credible leadership in Rome. And Berlusconi is probably on his way out. And Italy is heading for elections next year. So it's very, very difficult to come up with a reasonable, meaningful agreement today in Brussels.
The Eurozone Rescue Fund is also going to be increased. In fact, we're hearing reports from a draft statement that's been obtained by Reuters this morning, possibly a 4-fold increase of that rescue fund. Does that sound about right? And who's going to fund that?
Well, it sounds about right, and yet again, it won't solve the problems. It's just creating another financial time bomb, because what they're now doing is they're leveraging the means available to the European Rescue Fund. They are trying to create about 2 or 3 trillion euros out of 440 billion euros, and that sounds like financial alchemy once again. Yeah. And actually, what politicians are doing in Europe is exactly what banks did before the financial crisis in 2007.
I'm going to ask anyone I can think of this question, I think, from here on in. Oliver, if you were in charge, if you could actually compel these people to do what you think might be the right thing that might save the Eurozone and also the rest of us, what would you insist on?
I would insist on actually breaking up the euro, because as it stands at the moment with its current membership, it is not sustainable. I think there is no point keeping Greece within the eurozone, because as long as you keep Greece in the eurozone, they have no chance of economically recovering. The Greeks currently desperately need devaluation. At the moment, they're condemned to doing it through a so-called internal devaluation, which means cutting wages, prices, pensions by 30–40%, and that's just asking for civil unrest in Greece, and they have no chance. They need to leave the Eurozone, and I think it's time the European leaders actually accept that.
So it was a good idea at the time, but it's not working out.
I don't even think it was a good idea at the time, because some countries were simply not ready for it. You were really trying a one-size-fits-none monetary policy for the whole continent, and you were trying to unite countries that were simply too different to work together.
In the short term, and just finally this morning, Oliver Hartwich, what is the consequence of all of this for us here in Australia?
Well, I think it will just drag on longer, and it will create more uncertainty in international financial markets. And whenever that happens, of course, we can feel it here, because our own banks will see an increase in their funding costs. And I think it will have some knock-on effects for Australia, particularly also through the China route, because China and Europe are quite closely linked. And whenever China slows down, we know what that means for Australia.
I wish I could say it was terrific talking to you this morning, Oliver Hartwich, but it's always a little difficult. Nonetheless, I'm glad you joined us. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.